Well, I feel like it was Solo that made them put a break to the movies more so than Rise of Skywalker.
But, like, who asked for a Solo movie, you know?
I didn't ask for a sequel trilogy.
I guess that's fair.
And welcome back to a very special episode of the Games Gone By podcast. I'm your host, Adam Baskell, and joining me today, as always, two lifelong Star Wars fanatics, Austin and Jeff. How are you guys today?
I'm doing great. Ready to talk about the worst Star Wars show ever made, right, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited to continue our Star Wars podcast. This is great, y'all.
Slowly just becoming a Star Wars centric. Star Wars Gone By. But so Austin, you bring that up. I do want to just mention briefly that there has been this explosive response online that this is just the worst piece of Star Wars media ever, and I can't get behind that in the slightest. Not to say that we won't criticize a lot of it, we will, but like, you guys have seen The Rise of Skywalker, right?
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. Like, yeah, no, I was obviously kind of exaggerating there at the beginning. I don't think the Acolyte is that bad, and when you compare it to Rise of Skywalker, it's like not even close. So
it's Citizen Kane compared.
Yeah.
Granted, Rise of Skywalker is not a show, to be fair, but even compared to like Boba Fett, like you think Boba Fett is better than Acolyte? Like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, the Rise of Skywalker's awfulness really transcends the boundaries of a single media, if you will. So I am totally fine taking that movie and holding it up as worse than any other Star Wars content ever produced.
It's so bad, guys. It's so bad.
So this show is run by a woman named Leslie Headland, and she's actually known for creating Russian Doll alongside Natasha Lyonne and Amy Poehler. Have you guys seen Russian Doll at all?
I have not. She did that with Amy Poehler. I had like the Parks and Rec woman.
Yeah, well, she was just like one of the co-creators. I don't know exactly what that amounts to, but
no, I know nothing about Russian Doll. Is it a drama, a comedy? Like,
yeah, it's more or less a drama. It's definitely comedic, though. The short of it is that Natasha Lyonne's character is like stuck in a time loop on her 36th birthday, and it's one of these things where she dies over and over, repeats the same day, and it's like, you know, that extended metaphor for some past trauma or issue that needs to be dealt with to break out of the time loop. But in the process of this, she meets another guy who's caught in the same loop, and that is Yord, or the guy who plays Yord, and
in the Acolyte. Okay.
And then also one of her friends at the party that she has a conversation with every time she dies is Vernestra, who is also the showrunner's wife.
That's funny. I mean, I always approve of show creators taking their collaborators around and working on different projects, right? Like, supposedly that's why the original Star Wars movies were, like, good. It was because of the quality of the team producing them. And you can see how that has changed over time.
It's it's always good when you have like chemistry with actors and you know, your other creators and producers and things. So it makes sense that if you're kind of bringing your team along. I have not seen any of Russian Doll. I know very little about it. I did like know it existed, but I never seen any of it.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed it. Me and my fiance watched it. We both really liked it. So I was kind of pumped for this going in because she does a lot of interesting, which, you know, not like she directs every episode of either one of these, but assuming her influence is in the direction, there's a lot of really cool cinematography. There's really cool, just interesting sequences. So I was kind of pumped for it. But I actually was kind of, like, this show just kind of came out of nowhere for me. It was like, I learned all of this while it was airing. Did you guys actually kind of get hit with any of that pre-release marketing that was going around?
I remember a while ago, like, I think sort of after the movies fell off and maybe after the first season of The Mandalorian, like, at some point they had produced the logos for all of these Star Wars shows that they were going to do. And the Acolyte was one of them. And that might be the only piece of, like, pre-release marketing I encountered before the show actually aired. But it still stuck in my head then. I was like, oh, the Acolyte, something vaguely dark side related. Maybe they'll finally do something interesting with Star Wars again. We can only hope.
I consume all content ever all the time. So I definitely knew about Acolyte. I had seen the trailers leading up to it. I read a couple of the High Republic books, so I kind of knew what to expect from this era, and I had kind of followed along with this idea that we were going to be setting Star Wars in a new era, kind of harkening back to the Old Republic sensibilities of like new era, new characters, like whole new thing to explore. So I was really excited for that element of it. I wanted to see what new things we would get that were not tied directly to the, you know, ongoing Skywalker saga that they can't seem to pull away from.
Yeah, thank God just for this to be, I don't know, one of the only times that we've got a story that is almost entirely standalone in the Star Wars universe. Maybe not. We'll see where season 2 goes, but yeah.
I mean, as far as canon goes, I think it is like, you know, it is officially considered Disney Star Wars canon. I think it might be the only thing that is not in some way outside of the High Republic books and comics, I guess. It's the only like live action media or even like animated media that is not tied to the Skywalker saga in some way, shape, or form.
Yet.
At least not super directly.
They still can help themselves with a variety of references, but yeah, at least it's no
Sure.
like, direct tie-in plots, right?
Right, like even Mando, for as much as it kind of started feeling like its own thing, by the end of that season, it was very like, okay, we're talking about clones, we're talking about Palpatine, and you know, like we're Snoke, and like there were definitely clear references to cloning and things like that, and like Gideon kind of trying to do stuff with that. So it was like, okay, this is still very much tied to the sequels and everything going on in that.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, Luke Skywalker is a character in The Mandalorian, so...
Right.
I think he comes in season 2 though. Like even in season 1, they start to kind of weave things in, and I don't think they do that nearly as much in this. Like kind of setting it further back. Yeah, like we do get a couple cameos and things, but it definitely feels more separated than anything else that we've seen from Disney Star Wars, and I appreciate it for that alone.
Yeah, it's an appropriate thing to do, right? Like, it is about time someone tries to tell a fresh story in the Star Wars universe as opposed to, you know, having yet another family drama. But, you know, we'll see.
Right.
We'll see what happens in season 2.
And I think that's what excited me kind of pre-release, like going into, I didn't know much about the show creator or like any of the actors or anything in it. I knew, you know, Trinity was in it, right? Like I knew Carrie-Anne Moss was there. I knew some very little things about it. Like I knew the lead, Amanda, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I'm not going to try it. I think it's Amandala too. It's not even Amanda. It's like Amandala.
Uh-huh.
I knew she was in it. Like I knew most of like the lead cast. I knew the guy from Squid Game. I don't actually remember his real name either. But like I knew the cast a little bit, but I did not know much about what was going to be happening. So it was pretty cool to see a new story told without a bunch of expectation.
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea of any of that going into it, so it was all very fresh for me.
You mentioned, Austin, the High Republic. That was one thing I thought just... Like this, if you had told me this was in the Clone Wars, but they just went to a planet with no clones, I'd believe you entirely. To me, just like this new era of the Jedi does not come across really at all at any point.
That's probably one of my biggest disappointments with it, honestly, as someone who did read, again, not a ton of the High Republic stuff, but having kind of dived into that a little bit, like there's a whole faction of like these like space raiders who are like totally like separated from the Sith, and they're like a completely different type of enemy. Like they're less organized. They're a little more like just running around planet to planet, like destroying stuff. And like the Jedi are kind of trying to stop these random raids, and they kind of start to form under this group. They're called the Nihil or Nihil, something like that. They have this like whole different group of people, and there's this giant like starlight beacon thing that they're creating. It's supposed to be like this spaceship that's supposed to centralize the galaxy a little bit and like become like a big communications tower, and it's supposed to be like the pillar of the Jedi Order and like one of their biggest successes. And like none of that is shown in Acolyte in any interesting way. Like they don't do anything with the stuff that the High Republic kind of set up in its novels to differentiate it from, just like you said, being part of the Clone Wars.
Well, I think that's entirely fine, right? Like, isn't the Acolyte... So the Acolyte's only set 100 years before the prequel movies, so like a century or whatever. And the High Republic is supposed to be the hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Like a large time span, right?
I think the first High Republic book is like 300 years prior to Phantom.
Oh, that's more recent than I realized. But like, I had gone into this thinking that the Acolyte is set sort of at the end of that era, right? And then whatever this is supposed to blend into what you would call the beginning of the prequel era. I don't know. I've also very much lost the plot on Star Wars eras.
I think that's fair, but even then, it doesn't really show any of the High Republic things that I think they set up in the in the High Republic media that they have been working on, right? Like they don't really lean into that at all, I find. Like I think the Jedi are completely indistinguishable from what they are in the prequel era to me.
I mean, I think that's the correct take, right? I think that's a good thing. Like to the viewer, this is supposed to be the era of peace and prosperity, and the Jedi at the height of their power, right? Like we shouldn't be seeing galactic intrigue with raiders scattered across the galaxy or anything, or a Jedi civil war or something. It's supposed to be very boring and very Jedi at their most Jedi.
Well, maybe what Austin's getting at more of is that like they've just spent so much time associating all these things with the New Republic that it feels weird, or sorry, the High Republic, that it feels weird for them to then invoke the High Republic and use none of them. It's kind of like, if you remember the old Jedi Order books, there was the Yuzang Vong.
Yeah.
And it's like, you probably could tell a story in the middle of that intergalactic war without mentioning them, but it would be a little weird. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think so. And also just the perception of the High Republic, at least the way that I envisioned it when like reading the books and seeing all the pre-release marketing for the High Republic like book series and comic series and everything, is that the Jedi are at the height of their power, but with that comes a little bit more like grandiose like scale. The temple on Coruscant and the Acolyte looks like worse than any version of the temple I feel like I've seen in Star Wars. It just feels like run down and grungy, like the costume design, everybody just looks kind of boring. And I get it, right? Jedi will be Jedi. Like they are supposed to be kind of monk in nature, but it just feels like the High Republic treated the Jedi as something really special and like really grandiose. I know I used that word already, but it's the word that comes to mind with the way the High Republic wanted to portray those characters, and this just feels like it doesn't do that at all. And I found it weird to then set this in the High Republic and like market it as, oh, it's our first High Republic show and we're really going to explore that era, and then really not utilize it at all.
It is strange for them to have specifically branded it as a High Republic piece of content. Because you're right, it doesn't show off the splendor of the Republic at the time, right? Like the whole plot is across a bunch of backwater worlds, and we're hanging out with the Jedi monks, whose attire I think is fine, but they're not exactly ones to show off the opulence and sophistication of, the good times, the times before the Empire, as Obi-Wan would have called them. But yeah, I don't know. I will certainly not defend Disney's strategy for how to roll out different Star Wars content, since it appears to continue to be no strategy at all. But I will happily defend the actual content of the Acolyte, since I think that's like the interesting part of the show. And I am completely fine with them having ignored everything else, because that's probably the only way it turned out to be half good, in my opinion. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, we'll just chalk that up to strange marketing, because I think you're right. I mean, even the official like description on Disney Plus talks about taking viewers into a galaxy of shadowy secrets and emerging powers in the final days of the High Republic, right? So it's plot-wise, it's consistent, but I definitely get what Austin's saying, that like it is a strange marketing decision to do all of that stuff with the High Republic and associate it with that goober android in Jedi Survivor and the weird Arthurian cross guards on the sabers, and then just none of that is in this. So yeah, it's a little weird, but I don't think it ultimately ruins any real part of the show. Well, let's just go ahead and dive into the first episode here. I think it's one that it sets up what the story is going to be about pretty well. It introduces a lot of characters. It gets the setting in place. It gets the antagonist and the protagonist in place. What did you guys feel about this first episode? Like, were you pretty intrigued, or did you really need a couple more to kind of get into it?
The opening scene of this show is one of the best ones they've done in Star Wars TV. I also really enjoyed the opening of Ahsoka, which is a show I have completely forgotten by now. But this opening is awesome. You have Jedi Master Indara being ambushed by the would-be Darksider assassin. That's what I'm going to call her. May, one of the two twins in this story. And they literally come out swinging. Like the opening of the show is May beating up a bunch of Indara's friends, I guess. I'm not quite clear as to why the Jedi Master is hanging out in a seedy cantina. But whatever,
Are those
it's Star Wars.
bodyguards or just patrons? I really couldn't tell.
I I thought they were just like citizens hanging out.
Correct. I think it's just the people Indara was associating with doing whatever Jedi stuff she was doing on that planet, which May very rudely interrupts. Conveniently, it's a bunch of big, burly male aliens, I guess, and she proceeds to beat the shit out of them, at which point Indara has to very calmly stand up and, in that Trinity demeanor, begin to fight with Force Kung Fu, which is just amazing. I loved every moment of it. Austin, would you agree?
Yeah, no, that opening is pretty awesome. It's a great action set piece, really well choreographed, really sets the tone for what the action and the rest of this show will be like. Like it very much immediately, I was like, okay, I understand what the choreography direction for this show is, and it holds true throughout the rest of it. Unfortunately, I thought the rest of the episode was kind of mostly forgettable, though.
Yeah, exactly.
After that opening,
which is why I want to sit here and just talk about the opening scene for another few minutes.
I mean, that's valid. I understand that.
Nothing.
Well, we should mention that Osha is May, the would-be assassin's twin, which is something that the Acolyte struggles with, I think, for most of the show, to kind of properly portray this twin dynamic. But these two twins, Osha is probably unfairly blamed for the murder of Master Indara because they believe May to be dead. I think all of this is set up pretty early on in the show, right? Like, this is all happening in episode 1.
Yeah, that's right. So let's back up. So Indara is having this awesome Force Kung Fu fight with May in the bar, right? And what the opening sequence does so well is that it takes Indara, the Jedi, a while to actually pull out her lightsaber. And right from the very beginning of the show, they're already doing cool stunts like Master Indara using force speed, maybe, to practically wall run, like up onto the second level to fight, to continue the fight with May.
It's Force Trinity. It really is.
Yes. It is very much blending moves from the Matrix into Star Wars, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
For superpower.
I won't complain about that at all.
Now, she does finally take her lightsaber out at the end to start deflecting these like steel darts that May throws at her or whatever. And the interesting way that you get a apprentice and an acolyte able to kill a supposed like Jedi master with Force Kung Fu is she distracts Indara by trying to murder a civilian. And so while Indara is focused on saving the civilian from death, she gets stabbed in the heart with one of May's daggers. And that's what takes us off to a different scene where we meet May's doppelganger, and not doppelganger, but actual twin sister. And we get introduced to even more Jedi Knights. So what did y'all think of Yord, the Jedi Knight, and Osha's childhood friend? Austin, I'll let your take go first.
I honestly, like, Yord is whatever for most of, like, I like Yord, he's fine. He's just kind of the, like, gruff, like, rule follower type character for most of the show. He doesn't really do much for me. I don't hate him. He's just fine.
Is he the most, like, quintessential Jedi in this aspect, in that he, like, doesn't have a lot of interesting thoughts and is always just following the rulebook?
I thought Yord was the embodiment of, like, he even mentions at some point that he just made knighthood in the recent past. He's just that over-eager young Jedi who's trying to prove that, like, he is worthy of his new position. And it does translate into just kind of, like, an obnoxious rule following, to the point where he's even, like, completely distrustful of someone that he knew very, very well as children. And I think he's even going against his own intuition about whether Osha is guilty of this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So this is where we were picking up earlier with what you were saying, Austin, is that the Jedi go and find Osha, and they decide to arrest her because she's been mistaken for her twin. Now, in my head, like, is this the first instance of the twin plot already being weird and awkward? I would very much say yes. To your earliest question, Adam, like, did it take a while to get into the series? After that first fight scene with Indara, yes, it took several episodes for me to care. And for them to actually do something interesting that's worth watching. Austin, would you say that's because, like, just the fact that they picked twins as a plot, or is there something more fundamental that made the show boring for a couple episodes?
No, I mean, I don't mind the twin plot. I don't think they do anything particularly interesting with it, but I think it just, the beginning for me really it drags because I don't think much happens. It's so like we're setting up, and then we don't really get major payoff until later on. I feel like it's just there's so much like that they're trying to set up a mystery pretty hard in this. This is very much a mystery show, and I think that mystery maybe takes too long to get interesting in the beginning.
No, I would agree with you. And it's also just funny the number, we're complaining about it being boring, but they go through like 5 different sets in the very first episode. They go to a bunch of different places. I just don't care about any of them.
Yeah, none of them have any time to really be established as like a living part of this world. It's like, okay, now we're in a ship set. Okay, now we're in another ship set. Oh, now we're on an ice planet.
Yep.
Like, and then you never see any of it again.
Yep.
So it's like we're not establishing any real world building here, at least in the regards of like the places that we're going. It's just here's a set, here's a new place, here's a different area to look at, and it's like I don't care though.
Yeah. So Yord is the second Jedi we meet, and he brings his Padawan along. They arrest Osha, put her on an unmanned prison transport, and that transport crash lands on a planet. And after that weird crash landing, we finally get introduced to who I would call the main protagonist of the show, Jedi Master Soul. And he leads an expedition out to the ice planet to try and find this crash landed prisoner ship.
As far as Yord and all the new characters and Soul that are introduced at the end of this, I thought it did a good job introducing them because it makes it clear, like, what is it? Jeki is a Padawan under Soul, I think, or at least she's of Padawan status. Yord is that, they showed his Padawan in the beginning, and then she's never heard from again. But it at least establishes where he is. He's like a knight, so you kind of have across those 3 almost all levels of the Jedi Order represented, and I thought that was a good blend, and it kind of shows that like the wise master is more trusting and more kind of stoic and more patient, whereas like Yord and Jeki are like, oh no, this bitch looks like the person who killed, Endara, right? Like, what are you hung up on?
Yeah, do we really need to think about this? Yeah.
Yeah, there's an interesting interaction between those characters, but yeah, I would agree with you that the first episode like almost tries to do too much and accomplishes too little, and I'm glad we stuck it out. But yeah, not the strongest intro.
Yeah, not to get into too much of the like meta marketing of like how you run an episodic show week to week or whatever, but talk about a series that you should just sit down and binge in one day as opposed to trying to follow it every week.
Well, this one, if I'm not mistaken, how many episodes dropped day one? It was not just the first one.
Just 2 though, and
was it just 2?
It was just 2. By the end of episode 2, I was still like, oh, you had this great opening scene, and now I'm bored out of my mind. So
yeah, I definitely think this is one that takes more than 2 because if we don't have anything else to say about the first one, which I really don't think there is much else to say, the second one doesn't do a ton more to inspire confidence, I don't think.
Yeah, well, so the finale of episode 1 is Soul catching Osha, who's about to fall off a cliff for some reason.
But before we move on to the second one, though, I just wanted to mention one thing from the first episode. I think it's during that opening that I think really sets up this whole mystery, is that Indara, at one point, she's being goaded into attack May, and she's like, no, a Jedi doesn't strike someone that's unarmed. And May just looks at her and says, yeah, you do. So you know that, like, some shit happened. And I thought that was just a pretty quick way to set that up and to really, like, emphasize May's emotion and like why she is so upset in doing what she's doing. I mean, you don't really know why she's doing what she's doing, but you can tell the intensity of her emotion, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was a cool little touch.
It's a great way to fit exposition into an action-packed fight sequence, right? Which is like what you want to do. Not only is the choreography and the fighting actually great, but you're like being drawn into the story and these side quips they have and these pauses in the combat, which I think is a lot harder to do when there's lightsaber humming and clashing and stuff. So, more points to Force Kung Fu.
Yeah, and I guess the first episode just kind of ends with us getting a little glimpse of May's master, and he goes on his little rant about needing to kill a Jedi without a weapon. And that's exactly how it ends, right? With him overlooking or standing on that cliff.
Oh, I completely forgot that we get a shot of the stranger on apparently a different planet from where Luke Skywalker exiled himself in the sequels. But we're not going to talk about the sequels.
It's not Octu, is what it is. It's the planet should just be called not Octu.
It's
Right.
Octu before the Porg invasion.
Right. This is pre-Porgs. Porgs are an invasive species. Like,
look, they just really like shooting in Ireland. Anyway,
I can't blame them.
so after episode 1, how does episode 2 pick up, Adam? I can't even remember the opening.
So she's basically making it clear at this point that she's going to hunt down all of these former Jedi who wronged her somehow, right? And so she ends up at whatever temple. I can't remember exactly. I'm confusing all these locations too, but wherever the temple is that Master Torben is hanging out at, she gets there early and she's going to try to assassinate him. But of course, there's this like weird force energy field around him. And he's in this silent meditation. So she's like talking shit, but he doesn't respond because he's taken some vow of silence. And that's, I think, when we get our first glimpse at someone besides just Solon and Dara that was at that initial like Bryntalk controversy.
And
do we know at this point for sure? I'm trying to remember back specifically. Do we know that like there were 4 Jedi there? Like have we established like the exact number and everything at this point, or are we still kind of like unsure of who was there, how many were there, what was going on?
I think she mentions 4 pretty early. I could not tell you when we get the exact list, but it's early on in the show that you discover that 4 Jedi, Indara, Sol, Torben, and the Wookiee Kalnaka have somehow wronged May, and she's out on the warpath to kill all of them. And episode 2 is all about her attempts to kill Torben, who, like Adam said, has taken this Jedi vow of silence that I absolutely love. Austin, what was your first impression of permanent self-exile meditative force field Jedi Master Torben?
I did like the idea that he had kind of created this literal wall around himself that that May could not penetrate, and that it took some, like, you know, because obviously you think she just comes in there, he's just standing there, it's like, oh, she's just gonna kill him, this will be quick, right? And then no, he's got this literal force field, which is, you know, force field.
Yeah.
But I like that this forces her into some strategy, right? She has to go and find, we meet another important character that at this time we don't really know is important, but we meet this apothecary named Kamir, who's just a guy. He's played by
Jason from The Good Place.
Jason from The Good Place. I was trying to think of his real name, but who cares? It's Jason from The Good Place. It's Manny Jacinto is his name. Okay. He's played by Manny Jacinto. He's kind of this like, he gives me like Aladdin street rat vibes a little bit.
It's definitely what he's going for. Yeah.
And he's a pretty neat character. Like, he definitely, to me, felt like when you first met him, there was something going on with him that he was a little more than just this guy who is like trying to help May figure out a way to assassinate Torben. But I do like how that kind of dynamic plays out between those two characters. I like their banter, their interaction in those early parts of that episode.
Yeah, I think Manny does a very good job. He completely sells me on Chimere being some other dude who's kind of fallen into the web of the stranger, the random guy who ignited a lightsaber last episode. So
Darth Teeth.
Yeah. Well, we haven't even seen the teeth yet. But yes.
Do you not see the teeth in the first episode? When he turns around, you don't see the teeth? I thought you did see the teeth.
No, because it's like from a long shot. You can't make out that kind of
Okay. Yeah. Can't see the teeth yet. Yeah. All right.
Exactly.
That's fine.
Exactly. But yeah, I am completely sold on them being just, kind of a duo, and he's more of the bumbling, charming, evil guy out to assassinate Jedi. But yes, they eventually concoct a plan to actually kill Torben, and it's May is going to take poison right up to the Jedi and apparently offer it to him. And this is all happening while Sol has convinced the Jedi Council to let him take Osha with him and go and try and confront May before she gets her next target, which is clearly going to be Jedi Master Torben, because she's failed the first time, and that's why they know she's coming back. So Sol and Osha rush to stop her, but they fail. She manages to kill Torben and get out. Adam, do you want to describe how Torben dies?
I don't know if this is all he says, but he doesn't say much, and he definitely says, "We thought we were doing the right thing," before he drinks the poison and kills himself. Which, at that moment, I was like, hey man, this is really cool. Whatever these guys did must have been really fucked up.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, we'll get to that later. But yeah, I thought the scene itself was cool, though. I mean, at the moment, I really enjoyed it, and I was like, oh man, this is like really setting up something interesting that we typically don't associate with the Jedi.
Yeah, you see Torben's worn and scarred face, and he sort of calmly lets his defenses down, tells May that he's been waiting for her, and then willingly drinks the poison and dies, just in time for her to get away, and then a bunch of Jedi to show up at the same time as Osha and be like, Osha, did you kill this Jedi? Are you sure you didn't kill this Jedi? Like, none of us were in the room. But luckily you're
which is so tired.
Yeah.
It's another example of the twin plot being like, all right, we're doing this thing.
I think it was a little jokey, like on their take, because Yord immediately walks into the room. It's like, no, I followed her. She obviously didn't kill this master. Like, chill out, y'all. But I agree. This is another like example of some awkward pacing. Go ahead, Ella.
Isn't there a point at some point in this episode, or maybe the last one, where Sol just like extracts information out of a guard's head? Is it just the case that he doesn't want to do this to Osha, or is it that because she has Jedi training it wouldn't work? It seems weird to me that they just show that being something he can so easily do, and then it isn't later used in situations where it might be useful.
Yeah, well, I suppose so. This is Disney flirting with the idea of like Jedi mind powers and stuff. And I think later in the episode, Chimere, the bumbling idiot, makes fun of them for it. Like, please don't do a mind wipe or whatever it is you Jedi do. I think the implication, or at least what Disney has been doing, is that weak-minded people, right? Like Obi-Wan does with the very first mind trick, are vulnerable to this. It might be worth the time. It could also just be that Sol feels it's like justified at some times and unjustified at others. I don't know. The mind reading is hard to decipher in Star Wars.
So the strong-willed and Toydarians, they are immune to it.
Yes, and apparently some species are just too witty for the Jedi.
Yeah, that's always been a weird one.
But after all that goes down, they, like you said, they were kind of interrogating Chimere, and he's like, don't wipe my mind. And they find out enough to lay a trap for May, because they know she's coming back to Torben. But of course, like, they fail to stop her from killing him, and then because May hesitates to shoot her with a stun gun at the end, she also just gets away, which, I mean, is fine. I can kind of understand why she'd be hesitant to shoot her sister, but it was like, it's a stun gun. You think she killed your entire family and this Jedi. I wouldn't think she'd be that hesitant to shoot her, but I don't know.
That scene is played really weird for me. Like, I want to believe that she just missed.
Right.
Like, but it isn't played that way. But, like, I want to believe she just missed, because it doesn't really make any sense for her to hesitate in that moment quite like that. Like, she's so gung-ho the whole episode. Like, and I know, like, you see her, it's different than just wanting to do something. But it's just such a played out trope, and I thought that was like, I really wanted that moment to be like, okay, she just missed, but they never really play it that way, which is kind of a bummer for me.
Yeah, they should have chosen to do something more interesting with that, because we were fresh off of the Jedi springing their trap, and another excellent like Force kung fu fighting scene as Sol tries to like disarm May and capture her and interrogate her. But yeah, of course she gets away, and then of course her sister Osha, for whatever reason, lets her maybe get away. I don't know. This is, again, another example of, like, there's some fun choreography and some, like, interesting story beats, and then the execution just feels meh. Which is why going into episode 3, I was like, they really need to save this show somehow.
And I'm not entirely sure they do that in episode 3 quite yet.
Are we ready to throw down the gauntlet, Austin? Episode 3 might be the most interesting episode in the show.
Is it a minor miracle we made it to episode 3? Like,
it is.
Look, I have a lot of problems with the way episode 3 and then later episode 7 play out.
Sure. So maybe we can quibble about exactly how the Jedi and the Force Witches come to blows. But episode 3 takes us totally out of the story that we've been following so far, right? Like, we had been following this murder mystery with the twin sisters Osha and May as adults. Episode 3 opens with them as children. We finally get the backstory of, like, who are these sisters? Where did they come from? And what is this trauma everyone keeps alluding to back on Brendok 16 years ago? What is the great sin that these Jedi committed? And we find out that Osha and May were part of a coven, an exiled set of dark Force witches. And they're living alone and isolated, and the Jedi come and interrupt that. So, Adam, why don't you tell us about Soul's first interaction with the Force witches? Or actually, even, who are these Force witches?
So I don't know that we know entirely where they came from or anything, but it's that the two main characters, really, besides the girls, are Mother Anicia, who is the mother of them, right? She quite literally bore these two children. We find that out. And then, God, what's the crazy white woman's name? It's Mother Corell. Okay.
Yep.
And then she's a little more, what is she? I maybe describe her as maybe a little more like overzealous, a little more aggressive, a little more determined to get this ceremony, this ascension started that Soul observes. Because Soul basically sneaks up on this coven, right? And he's witnessing this ritual, and he can't tell what it is, but he sees the two girls, and he's just convinced they're in danger because there's no other children around. There's a bunch of spooky-looking witches chanting spooky things. And he's like, okay, these children are going to die. They're going to be sacrificed. And this is what sets off his whole kind of motivation throughout this whole thing, is he is convinced that these two girls are in danger.
Right. And so we see this storyline from a lot of, actually not from a lot of perspectives, mostly from Osha's perspective. So we get to see Osha and May interacting with her coven, where her mother Anastasia, the leader of the coven, seems to have a different take on the Force than the Jedi do, right? So we get some cool scenes about her hating on Jedi dogma, talking about not a force, but a thread that binds the galaxy together. And we discover that this coven wants May and Osha to be their future. And the super dark secret that we can't tell the Jedi about is that the twins don't have a father, right? So apparently, like, these witches who are played as sketchy, like they're not playing by the rules, they are outcasts, they've been exiled, have somehow used the Force to bring children into the world, and that is something that the Jedi can't abide by, or at least everyone thinks that the Jedi couldn't abide by. So the witches have this ceremony to promote the girls and bring them into the coven, and that's where the Jedi first confront them, and things get really testy really fast. Although we get another cool use of the Force. Have we ever seen a Darksider just possess a Jedi before? Austin, what was your reaction to Torben's like constriction?
Yeah, that is a really cool scene for sure. I definitely like the exchange between the Jedi and the Force witches here. Like, there is definitely a lot of tension, and you can feel you can feel how like this could escalate pretty quickly. And I like how Anastasia just kind of like calms everything down, and it shows that she is not an escalation point, right? Like, it buys you in a little bit to this idea that, okay, maybe the Jedi were a problem in this moment, because you see the Force witches, you see Anastasia kind of calm everything down. She's like, yeah, the kids can be tested. Like, let's let them have their thing. And I really liked that about that moment. Like, it's a very tense moment that is then de-escalated by the person that you maybe wouldn't think would de-escalate it.
Yeah, that's right. So like like Austin was talking about, they de-escalate the situation, the Jedis test the girls, and then Osha's insistent on becoming a Jedi. Like, I guess she wants to follow every little girl and boy's dream and become a Jedi. But the Coven doesn't want that, so she gets sent to her room where her sister tries to kill her. So from her perspective, May sets a fire. Osha barely escapes with her life. She sees her sister one more time and the rest of the Coven dead on the ground before she's rescued by Soul. Her and May are separated across a chasm on some precarious bridges, and then Soul manages to grab Osha off of the bridge before May falls, presumably to her death.
Okay, but Osha... Yep. But Osha has no idea Soul is there doing that with the bridges?
No, correct. So
okay.
We get to revisit all of these details in episode 8, but that all comes before the best episode in the season. Go ahead.
Do we even need to talk about 4?
4 and 5 are pretty much like the same episode, right? Like
what happens?
It's all the same. I can't tell you a single thing that happens in episode 4.
They walk into the woods. So episode 3 we get into all of the backstory of May and Osha, and then episode 4 we jump back into the storyline, right? Like May is off to kill the next Jedi on her hit list. That is the Wookiee Jedi Kalnaka. More points to the creative team for deciding to portray a Wookiee Jedi for real. Good job.
I love that.
Yeah. And so May and Kymir, the apothecary from before, trek off into the woods to try and find Kalnaka. And Sol assembles a Jedi strike team that is hot on their heels. There's like 7 or 8 Jedi with him, including his Padawan Jeki, and he somehow convinces the council to let Osha come along again. And so Osha goes to the next scene of the potential crime, and they all journey into these dark, bug-infested woods. And most of the episode is very forgettable, right up into the final moment when we get the reveal of Darth Teeth. So, Adam, what was your first impression of seeing a Dark Jedi in a live-action sequence?
I find like big over the top displays of force push super corny. So the very end, I was kind of like whatever. But because I always think back about how like in the original trilogy, it is just such an effortful thing to do the slightest bit of telekinesis to the point where like when Yoda picks the X-wing out of the trunk or the swamp, he kills himself. So
he dies in the next movie. Adam, come on.
Oh, whatever.
I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but all right.
It's like. It clearly wears him out. And it's also like, but whatever. In some points of the EU, they throw suns at each other. So what are we, No, his actual appearance, though, I thought was super cool. I really liked the mask. I really liked just his, he's very intimidating, right? Like without being particularly large, without being particularly like alien, it's kind of just a guy in almost a B-rate horror mask, and yet something about the whole aesthetic just it really works.
Yeah, I think this really brings us to the impressive like cinematography and directing you were talking about from the show creator, like in her other work. I think it really comes through in this moment. Like this is the most like haunting portrayal of an evil darkness appearing on screen in Star Wars. Like way better than any other reveal of a bad guy. The shot is just over Osha's shoulder. So the stranger, the evil dark Jedi, just floats down in a way we've seen before. This is kind of what Count Dooku did in the prequels, but just Count Dooku wasn't like this weird, ominous shape, and he didn't have a helmet that looked like it was like a mask from the Saw movies, right?
Yeah.
With metal teeth across his face. What was that joke you quoted, Adam? Smilo Ren? Truly terrifying.
Yeah. They do a great job in this episode of just the cinematography. I mean, and really this whole show. I think if you look back through our Discord chat, almost every time we're talking about an episode, one of us says, oh man, that one shot was so cool. Having just watched The Phantom Menace again, holy shit does like good cinematography affect your story.
Yeah, camera A, camera
none
B,
of this A camera, B camera crap. True artful positioning of cameras and thinking about the shot. I think this show does a great job of that.
Yeah, and they really blended it well with the soundtrack too. Like just the change in the sounds as the stranger comes on screen is just really good.
This show, out of all the Star Wars shows, has the best like thoughtful composition, cinematography, like just making very deliberate choices with what it's trying to portray and like how it's trying to portray it. And everything else feels like, okay, we're shooting a TV show, cool. And there's a couple moments I think in every show that has like great shots and whatever, but this show, like every episode, there are moments where you're like, damn, that is a cool shot, or like, man, the way they shot that was so effective. And this scene, especially like with the lighting, the darkness, like at the end of this one, do all the Jedis ignite their saber, or is that at the beginning of 5?
It's right there at the end here, right? Like, oh shit.
Right, like everybody like ignites their saber, and it's like just this like standoff, and it looks so cool and it's so impactful.
It's a great sequence that for Adam at least ends on the sour note of like, oh no, now everyone got corpse push. But I love it. And that leads directly into episode 5. So episode 4 is called Day. Episode 5 is called Night. And episode 5 is why you should watch this TV show.
It's so good.
Yeah. It is the best lightsaber choreography. Sorry, we're not talking about maps. We're talking about fight sequences. The best lightsaber choreography in live action Star Wars, probably since, the battle with Darth Maul, which is the only reason you should ever watch The Phantom Menace. So after the forced push, we come back in. It's Osha. She wakes up. The first thing she sees after having been knocked out from this force power or whatever is the corpse of a Jedi. And that's how you know the show has decided to let loose and it's time for people to start dying.
You just called it forced push, which is funny because that's exactly what I think it is.
Heyo.
No, but man, this scene is awesome. It brings, we mentioned earlier briefly, and we've talked a bunch off air about how cool the combat in this show is when it doesn't necessarily directly involve a lightsaber. Just all the kicking, the jumping, the punching, the just doing something with your body besides swinging the saber at their saber. And this scene is awesome with it, not only because it's just generally been good, but because Darth Teeth has a cortosis bracer and helmet that he uses to headbutt away lightsabers, and it's awesome. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, this whole episode is like 90% action, but it executes it so perfectly that it doesn't even matter. Like, and there definitely are story beats and important story beats and whatnot in this episode, but so much of the action is so well composed and so well choreographed. There's so many cool scenes. And, obviously we expect, I think at the beginning of this episode, that all of our red shirt Jedi that have joined Soul Strike Force, like once we see Darth Teeth, we're like, okay, like all these guys are dead. But very quickly we realize the stakes are raised and we actually see major characters dropping. And I know, Jeff, that hit you particularly hard, I feel like, because I know I don't think you were expecting main character deaths here.
Yeah. No, I freaking loved it. I mean, like, so the whole time you're going into the show, and you're like, okay, there's a guy with a red lightsaber. All right, it's a dark Jedi, but the Sith were supposed to have been, extinct for a millennia. So how are we going to reconcile this with the canon, right? Like, you can't just have, Soul running around forever, or Yord having fought a dark Jedi now and then not have it ever come up again in the Jedi archives, right? And this is why, okay? Like, the show gets major points for the stranger going on an epic killing spree. Like we talked about, the first thing that Osha sees is a dead Jedi, and then she witnesses from afar the brutality of the stranger's combat with the rest of these Jedi masters, and including Yord. So there's like a multi-way saber fight that she's kind of seeing from the trees that obstructs some of it, but you can see the ferocious attacks of the stranger as he turns people's lightsabers off, impales people, slashes limbs off, and then does what is arguably, the most violent thing I've seen in a Disney TV show.
It's like horrifying.
When he impales one Jedi, force pulls another Jedi into that impalement, so he makes a Jedi kebab, and then spins and decapitates both of them, which I cheered at. So, Adam, did that moment bring you to tears?
Well, what does that say about you, Jeff? That's what...
The Empire has been underrated for too long.
Well, I actually thought you were going to talk about the triple chest punch of Jackie or George's neck being snapped. So really, we had a lot of very violent things.
But I say there's so many moments. Because I also thought we were going for the 3-hole punch, because, oh my God, that is such a like crazy shocking moment to me. Like, just seeing it's so quick, it's so fast, and like you see the battle and you're like, okay, Jackie's not gonna come out of this alive, like there's no way.
Yeah.
And you just don't know how brutally it's going to happen, because that is so intense.
That's what's so great about this fight scene, is that I was legitimately guessing the whole time what's going to happen to Jackie, right? Because she has a solo duel with the stranger for a little while, where he's kind of toying with her.
Awesome fight too.
Yeah. He's kind of toying with her, and almost goes to kill her, but Jackie manages to pull out a second lightsaber that she had scavenged from a dead Kelnaka earlier. Did we mention that? Yeah, Kelnaka dies, but that's not important to this episode.
Somehow one of the least interesting parts of the episode, really. But.
And I think it is the least interesting part of the episode.
She might have technically found him dead at the end of the last episode. I can't remember. But yes,
I think so, yes. But
there's this great scene where Jackie goes into dual lightsaber combat, and she's the first one to bring out the double lightsabers, right? We've got this unorthodox Darksider cutting people down left and right, but Jackie holds her own because she pulls out some unorthodox moves of her own. And then he gets distracted because his apprentice, May, who he's angry that she has betrayed him, runs off, and he decides that he is going to go hunt her down. Then we get some more scenes of like Soul and Jackie like saving May from being killed, and there's this great back and forth fight that I think really like reminded me a lot of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon fighting Darth Maul. Do you guys feel like that's an appropriate comparison?
Yeah, I definitely do think there's some great like partner choreography throughout this, whether it's Soul and Jackie, or I think we even see moments where like Yord and Osha do some interesting things together, not necessarily with lightsabers, but like there's a lot of interesting like partner team up things that happen instead of just like one-on-one duel. So I definitely think there's some great moments there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all culminates in the reveal of who is the Darksider, right? Like the show has had a lot of mysteries going on, and one of them is like, who is the bad guy? And then what is easily the greatest bad guy reveal in Star Wars, not just live action, but just in Star Wars, is Jackie sort of like giving into her rage, attacking the stranger, but she's lost her second lightsaber, and the stranger turns it around on her. He decouples his lightsaber, right? Like this is a great nod to stuff we've seen in the EU and video games before. And now he's suddenly got two blades. He blocks her blade with one and then stabs her 3 times in the chest. And as her dead body,
so cool,
her lifeless form falls to the ground, you see that she has knocked his helmet off, and actually it's been Chimere the whole time. No, he's not a fun Aladdin street lat. He is here to annihilate the Jedi Order.
At the beginning of this entire sequence, there's like 2 new unnamed Jedi that show up with the Strike Force, and I just thought, okay, well, they're going to die, but everyone whose name we've learned, they're going to be fine, right? It's a Disney show. Boy, gentlemen, was I completely wrong about that?
We were so wrong. Yeah, that's where all the internet nerds had to finally admit that, like, oh, they did something bold with this TV show.
Well, so did either of you... I know probably neither of you paid as much attention to like outside talk during the show, like, the internet. But did either of you see the Chimere reveal coming?
No, I was genuinely caught off guard. They kept me guessing up until the last moment. Like there's a line where where Yord is describing how the stranger can get into your head and mess with your mind. And Osha's like, oh, my mom used to do that. So my last guess is that it was going to be like a Force switch. Like maybe it was her Zabrak mother Curol come back. I genuinely had no idea who it was going to be. I did not expect for Darth Jason to be both ripped and brutal in this TV show.
Well, if you saw some of the talk in some corners of the internet, Austin, you would have assumed that this was going to be some type of Yas Queen reveal, right?
Well, of course.
I mean, part of me kind of thought it had something to do with the witches too. Yeah, I really didn't know, but that was kind of my best guess. And maybe if I went back and watched all the scenes with Chimere, maybe there's some just really heavy hints that are dropped. But I definitely didn't really pick up on them the first time.
I didn't have a strong opinion. Like myself, like just kind of as I was watching, I didn't really know. I don't really watch TV shows trying to decipher the mysteries. I feel like a lot of people watch it with a very like, I need to guess what's going to happen next. I don't really do that. I try and just kind of let it happen as much as I can. But, right, in reading like comments and comment threads and stuff about these episodes, I feel like a lot of people were guessing the stranger was Darth Jason. Like, I feel like a lot of people were guessing that Chimere was going to be the Darth Teeth. So I wasn't, like, completely blown away by that, because I had read a lot of people theorizing as such. But the reveal is still very effective. Like, I do think the actual reveal in the moment and the way it's all composed, like, the shot is composed, is super effective, and it's super cool. And I really love the line right after that, where, like... Or it might even be before that, but when Soul's asking, like, who are you? What are you? And he's like, you would call me Sith, but he never commits to being called a Sith in this moment, which I also thought was really cool.
Yeah, the stranger Darth Jason, that's just going to be his name from now on.
Well, we're going to call him by like 30 different names throughout the rest of this, so I will not commit to one. I can't do it.
His dialogue in this episode, I think, is the best from the whole season from him.
Definitely.
Especially the line where Saul comes back. Saul witnesses Jecky's death, right? Like, he had been fighting side by side with her. Jecky made a foolish move and paid for it with her life. And then Saul tries to confront Darth Jason about it and be like, you killed a child. And he just turns it right back around on Saul. Like, you brought her here. This is
right. This is your own fault, dude.
His one-line responses are awesome, like the whole time.
Yeah.
I am honestly incredibly impressed with just his entire portrayal through the entire show. Like, I think Manny Jacinto knocks it out of the park. He's a guy that, right, I only know as Jason from Good Place. Mm-hmm. So I always associate him with being the goofy, that's his whole character in that show. And like, he has some moments of introspection and like great moments, but he plays just such a different role here. And I think he just knocks it out of the park. Every line he delivers has the right, like, you feel the right emotion that you would expect to feel. You're like, yeah, like, that's so good. I think he's great in this whole show. He definitely shines here, I would say, but I think he's just so great in the whole show.
Austin, do you feel like maybe some people guessing that had anything to do with kind of like out of universe thinking? Like, in the same way that no one thought Carrie-Anne Moss was going to never come back into this show after the first episode, do you think people were like, oh, there's no way they got the guy from The Good Place to be like a throwaway character for half an episode?
That's definitely possible. I could imagine people were just assuming like you wouldn't get that guy with that recognition to play like this weird street rat for one episode.
Yeah, I'm with you that for reasons like that, I also try not to think too hard about these kind of mysteries, because if you try to connect out of universe dots, you'll probably figure it out, but like, that's not fun.
I mean, it totally backfired on me. I never expected them to cast the silly dude from The Good Place as the brutal, dark Sith Lord in this episode. So
true.
I mean, you wouldn't expect that from this actor, at least at what we had seen up to this point. But he kills it in every episode, but especially this one. He's so intimidating. Every scene with him is just like, I got chills watching almost every scene with him in this episode.
But before we wrap this one up, I want to give Jeff a place to rant. Apparently, Kylo Ren's theme is played in this episode multiple times.
Unacceptable.
And so the internet is full of speculation that Khmer is a Knight of Ren. Do you think this is just like the worst thing ever?
It would be such a bad narrative decision. Like, I'm convinced the only reason they did that is because like they really wanted to reinforce that, like, hey, he's an evil guy, so let's play some of the dark side theme, right? That when we've seen other Dark Jedi on screen, they're not going to play the Imperial March. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah, so that's really the only reason in my head that they play some notes from the Kylo Ren theme once Jason is obviously, revealed to be the bad guy, right? Like, they're just trying to put Star Wars music in appropriate, like, Star Wars moments. This isn't a super secret nod to him starting the Knights of Ren or whatever. And if they ever do any kind of tie-in with the sequels, it's just the wrong choice. Like, just let that story die.
Is this what the kids would call cope? Is that
cope? I don't. I'm gonna go on a tangent slightly, because I never really fully understood what Disney was thinking and where they were planning to go with the Knights of Ren stuff.
Don't worry, neither were they.
They weren't, Austin. That's the thing. So
if this is really their answer to the Knights of Ren thing, like, that's going to be incredibly disappointing. I know people are theorizing it. I've also seen those same discussions. I really hope they don't try and tie that in any way, shape, or form, because it's such a long leap to me. Like, it's like, why would you do that?
Yeah, it's silly, and I think that's the greatest risk to the success of another season or two of the show, is if they suddenly try and make it too much of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and tie it into every other Star Wars property they've ever had. Like, no, thank you. Let's just have a nice standalone story that we can talk about without having to think about Ben Solo or Luke Skywalker.
Did the last thing before we move on, I think there's not much else to say about this one, but did we talk about the fact that Jord gets his neck snapped? I think we mentioned it, right?
Yeah.
Because that is equally brutal.
Yes, he does die. It's bring back the physicality though, right? Like he tries to turn around the stranger's moves and manages to use his like cortosis helmet or whatever to deactivate his lightsaber at the same time that Jord's lightsaber gets deactivated, and then they kind of like try and fight, and Darth Jason is just like, I'm not having any of this. He like snaps Jord's arm, he drops to the ground, and then he snaps Jord's neck right in front of Osha, and it's beautiful.
I do like that this episode kind of takes a cast that was like maybe starting to balloon a little bit and just brings it right back to like yeah, it brings it right back to our core focus though. It's Sol, Osha, May, Darth Jason, right? Like that is the core focus of the rest of the show, and like any other character that shows up doesn't really have a ton to do because the story stays very focused on those four. And I like that this episode kind of took that cast that was starting to maybe get out of hand a little bit and then just kind of bring it all back down and be like, nope, we're keeping our story simple and we're keeping it focused. And I liked that about it.
Yeah, they purged the narratives, and it was beautiful.
They don't make the Jedi complete idiots when they come up against the cortosis. It's not like they just stand there. Oh my God, what do we do? He's invincible. Like Jackie figures out to knock the helmet off. Jord uses it to, swing at him like a melee weapon. I think in the last part of the duel, Sol is like really just fighting him hand to hand. Like they're not stupid, and I appreciate that because sometimes Star Wars is bad about making the Jedi look stupid. So I kind of liked that about this fight.
Yeah, it really shows that they are going all out and are thinking on their feet, and they are capable of like taking on different adversaries. It's just that sometimes you try your hardest and you still lose, and they lost in this episode.
Yeah, and I guess to wrap this up, like Austin said, not a ton happens after this. Basically, Osha ends up luring all those like light-sensitive creatures to the scene, and they end up distracting Darth Teeth. And that basically allows her to go find May. She stuns May. They have a little face-off in which like May recovers and then stuns her. And then they switch outfits, right? So May steals Osha's clothing so that she
literally takes her clothes.
Yeah.
We literally have Parent Trap going on now.
Yeah.
So.
In a not so subtle thematic depiction here, they swap outfits from black and white. And May is basically trying to full soul sneak on board and like pretend to be Osha so she can, kill him, God knows what else. And then of course, like Kamir comes across Osha now dressed in black, and it's very, I guess, pretty obvious at that point to me that this is his new apprentice, right?
He has decided to dispose of the old one because she betrayed him, and now he has a chance at using her sister in the way that he wanted to use May.
I'm about to say, they definitely at least want you to think that he's going to try and do that. And I think I was pretty quickly sold. Like, yeah, okay, like, we're going to see a role reversal thing happen here. Like, May's going to be the more light side one, and Osha's going to be the more dark side one by the end of this. That kind of fell flat to me. A lot, in a very similar way, I thought May sneaking aboard the ship and, like, confronting Sol also felt kind of weird because it was like I feel like she had plenty of opportunities to kill him and she just doesn't, and her motivations felt really weird for me throughout this chunk of episode. Like 4 to 6, I feel like May's motivations fluctuate and waver a lot in a way that I didn't like.
Yeah, I think maybe it was supposed to be the revelation that her sister Osha is still alive was supposed to shake her faith in some stuff, but that never really came across. And after we get all of the great moments in episode 5, we go into episode 6 where I feel like the writing just kind of falls down again. You've got May running around pretending to be Osha with Sol on a ship, and it's like, all right, whatever.
There's really some like Scooby-Doo ass stuff going on in that episode too, where it's like May's like hiding and like sneaking around corners and stuff, and she does the factory reset on the droid, which I know Adam loves.
I thought the red eyes was just comical.
His eyes literally turned red, like, oh, he's a bad guy now. So
it's like, come on, guys.
It's probably worth mentioning that through the first 5 episodes, we have occasionally flashed back to Coruscant to just see Vernestra looking suspicious as fuck.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all of the time.
And that's pretty much all she does, to be fair. It's just look suspicious.
From the moment she opens her mouth until the last scene of the movie, there is nothing about this character that makes you think like, oh yeah, above board, Jedi code, I'm going to trust that one.
Yeah, no, and that is clearly what they're going for, right?
Yeah.
Venestra is your window into the like, oh, maybe the Jedi do have a bit of hubris going on. Maybe it is their fault that a single Sith Lord overthrew the government, a century from now.
Right.
But anyway, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Yeah, so once we get the Scooby-Doo shenanigans going on with Osha and Sol, what did you guys think? Sorry, with May and Sol. God, I can't even keep them straight anymore.
Twin plot.
What did you guys think about Osha confronting her friend's murderer in the bath?
Adam, I feel like you have strong opinions on this.
that was a little strange to me. Listen, I'm not like a prude or anything, but I just found that Star Wars has never been good about anything related to like sex or romance at all. And so any sign of it always just has me like rolling my eyes in the back of my head. It was fine though. And I think what it leads to by the end of this episode is a super cool scene and a really cool cinematic shot with her like in the helmet at the end. So there's definitely some really cool stuff with her ending up at the little headquarters of Darth Jason here.
That's right. They go back to his hideout, and to your point, Adam, I really don't remember what all transpires between them, but Osha puts on the helmet, and that's just a fantastic shot out the highs of the helmet as she like sort of, I guess, I don't know, toys with her darker nature or just wrestles with her connection to the Force.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what they're going for there, is just kind of like her maybe taking her first step into the more dark side of the Force, where she's kind of letting her emotions that she's been kind of burying kind of take like flourish a little bit. But a lot of the conversation between Darth Jason and Osha in this episode like wants you to, she's struggling with her darkness and all that stuff, but like none of it really felt memorable to me. I mean, you're just talking about like you don't remember anything that they talk about. Neither do I. Like it feels like they're trying to do a thing where like he's trying to seduce her to the dark side, but not a lot of it lands. And in some ways, it feels like he's actually trying to straight up seduce her at moments. And it feels a little weird. This whole episode doesn't really do much for me, I'll be honest.
Yeah, it very much felt like a bit of filler to me, and is where my complaints come from. The awkward pacing, like I don't know. Yeah, you talk about seducing her to the dark side, but like again, he just murdered all of her friends, and his response to that is to get naked, and that just confused me. So
my man needed a bath, Sometimes it's like that.
He's gotta wash away the filth of having murdered about a dozen Jedi a moment ago.
I guess they were trying to just emphasize that, like, even at his most vulnerable, May or Osha, who's there at this point?
Osha, it's Osha.
Osha is there.
Osha is no match for him, right? And they take that to just the extreme. That like, oh, he's so vulnerable, he's naked and unarmed.
Yep,
that makes sense. Like he's just like he's letting himself be completely exposed, and it could also be doing another thing where it's like he trusts that Osha has so much conflict that she wouldn't attack him.
You're right. That's like, a really good point where he's like
he believes that Osha has enough conflict in her that she wants to talk to him and figure stuff out, and she will be willing to kind of lean more into the dark side stuff. So she won't attack him in this moment.
Yeah, and they do double down on that, right? Like later, she literally holds the blade to his throat.
And he can fight back, but he just does not.
He doesn't, because he knows that her fight isn't with him for some reason. I don't know. It's still strange.
But what about Light Whip, guys? What about Light Whips?
This is the episode where Vernestra has like assembled a clandestine crew of Jedi. She's like, tell no one, and certainly don't
another clandestine crew of Jedi.
Right.
We don't have two in the same show.
We have to investigate the missing investigators. So
exactly.
And so she ends up landing on Kofar with her little squad of Jedi, and she sees all the dead Jedi, and they don't see Sol. And so I think she starts to wonder if he had something to do with it, which we later find out is all part of her plan. But she's sort of like, oh man, this must have been Sol. And what does she deflect with the light whip? Is it one of the weird creatures? I can't remember.
I think it's one of the bug things.
Yeah, she kills one of the bugs with her lightsaber whip.
It's fine. I think Jeff made a good point earlier when we were talking about this. when you do too much crap like that, it does kind of take away from the whole idea that they're like these rigid traditionalists that are set in their ways, when very clearly they're like, hey, take our most sacred symbol and just do whatever the fuck you want with it.
Yeah. So this is, we could do an entire podcast episode on this, but it's like this meta conversation of like, how do you make Jedi cool, appealing entertainment icons that like your consumers can kind of individually associate with like how they want, right? Like let's do different and interesting things so that more people will be excited by the Jedi. But the Jedi are fundamentally like Buddhist monks crossed with samurai, which like have a very specific image, and part of the image of the Jedi is like rigid stoicism and sort of having a uniform. So like my gripe with the lightsaber whip is that just like over time, Star Wars has done more and more different things with the most iconic weapon of the Jedi. And it's like, you don't have to do that. It's a lightsaber. It's already the coolest fucking sci-fi weapon ever. All right. Like,
yeah, but light whips are cool too.
No,
okay. I actually like it. I think it's kind of cool. I am a little like, it's weird to bring it into this character, and I know Vanestra is also in some of the other High Republic stuff, so I think she utilizes it more in that stuff, but it's like, it is a little weird to have this moment where she just like takes down this bug, and that's the only time you ever see the light whip come out. Well, it's like, what was the point of this?
That's your tie into the High Republic, Austin, right there. She has the
yes, you're right. God, how can I be so stupid?
I have a feeling this is the only time we will ever see her use it, because just imagine a fight scene with that. It's stupid. You would hate it. You hate it.
It would probably be really hard to make cool, but I mean, I imagine if you just use it like a whip, it could be cool.
I'm not even sure how you make whips cool though. Like,
I feel like I've seen whips be cool. I don't know.
In Indiana Jones, that was the last time a whip was
right.
cool.
You're right. That was it.
Castlevania, I don't know. Like,
all right, fair enough.
The other Harrison Ford franchise. That's the only place they're cool.
Whips in live action probably would, like a lightsaber whip in live action would probably be harder than like a whip in animation. Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got the crew of investigators investigating the investigation. We have OSHA sort of falling to the dark side. Should we talk about the actual conflict at the heart of this whole series? What the Jedi did on Brendok?
I was going to say, yeah, that brings us now to what is probably the most interesting episode.
Yep, I would say this is probably, in my opinion, the most like controversial episode, I think. Because, right, what we're getting with episode 7 is we're returning back to the episode 3 flashback, but we're seeing it kind of from the Jedi's perspective this time. We're seeing I feel like this happens in other I can't think of what other show it happens in, but this idea of like, we see something from one perspective, now we're going to see it from another. Like, it's a pretty traditional storytelling technique. And I was interested in them doing it. I don't think it's executed the best.
You didn't like the reveal, getting all of the backstory of what really went down that night?
I don't think it works. And I think that's because, right, this show has hinged its entire plot on this one moment, this one event that happens in episode 7, or that happens in, that we're seeing finally happen in episode 7. But it all hinges on this one moment with Osha and May as kids, and I don't think the actual reveal is satisfying enough. Like, I don't think the motivations and the logic behind everything is strong enough for me to buy into all the motivations for the characters that have come around. Do you agree or disagree? I feel like you disagree with that.
I definitely do disagree with it, but let me ask you, if Torben had been less of a bitch, would you like it more? Or?
I don't know, and the reason why, so we should probably talk kind of about what happens here, right? We go back to the beginning and we see Sol spotting Osha and May, just like we did back in the other one, and we kind of see a lot of these same things happen again. But this time we see that when Mother Anastasia was messing with Torben's mind, like, she was kind of prompting him to go back home.
Oh, that's such a cool scene, though. Again, to bring us back to interesting uses of the Force, right? Like, in episode 3, we only saw Torben lock up with his black eyes glazed over. And this, you find out that Mother Anastasia is, like, invading his mind through the Force and taunting him with what we've seen as his, like, desires and frustrations. He's tired of being on this planet. He wants to go home, and she's making this classic bargain with him of like, look, just make the deal with the devil here, and I will give you what you want. My only problem with it is that it's all undercut by like Torben's gripe being the fact that he's been camping for 7 weeks. Like that is,
and that is his whole that is Torben's driving motivation, which is a stupid driving motivation. I would agree with you. It's 7 weeks is like now he's like traumatized and needs to go home.
It really plays down the Jedi training. It's like, oh, okay, I guess your life studying the Force on Coruscant did not prepare you for camping for 7 weeks, and it's just like, come on, man.
I would agree that this particular depiction is pretty cool because, you know, we've seen Obi-Wan force persuade before, but this, instead of being just like total mind control, was like playing off his own insecurities. And that, I thought that was a cool touch. Like, I would agree with that.
Yeah, it kind of like makes him like spiral. Like he like starts to like get into his own head and he's like, yeah, I really do want to go home. Like this sucks. So like, but that's without her like making him feel that way. She's just pushing him a little bit. It's a more traditional manipulation tactic, I think, than what we normally see with the Force.
Yeah.
And we really do kind of see the Jedi, right? We know there's 4 Jedi, Indara, Kanaka, Torben, and Sol, and we really kind of see them split into 2 groups here almost, where it's like Sol and Torben both feeling one way for very different reasons, but like they're very much, we need to rescue these kids, we need to get off this planet, we need to take down these Force witches. And then we have like Indara and Kanaka who are just kind of like, we should maybe just leave them alone. like let them kind of do their thing. And we kind of see this like little bit of division in the Jedi here, I feel like, which is interesting. I just, again, don't know if I buy the motivations for Torben or Sol, really.
Yeah, Sol supposedly feels this deep connection to Osha and even tells Indara that he sees her as being his Padawan. And I realize this is back in time. This is when Sol was a Jedi Knight, so that's going back to seeing some of the overzealousness that Yord portrays in the first couple episodes, right? But like he just directly disobeys Indara's orders that are also directly the Council's orders. So it's again the Jedi being set up to be seen as like, oh, by failing to follow their own code, their own wisdom, this is the hubris of the Jedi, just infiltrating the institution of the Jedi and leading to many mistakes, which culminates in the 4 Jedi going and essentially attacking the Witch Coven in an effort to free Osha and May from what I can only assume they believe is a ritual sacrifice. I believe that's what they were hinting at the whole time. Is that right, Austin?
I mean, I guess that's what it has to be to me, right? Like, it has to be that Sol interpreted whatever this ritual was as something that was harmful to them, even with no real evidence of that, in my opinion.
He had a bad feeling about it, Austin.
Yeah, I mean, in classic Star Wars fashion, he had a bad feeling. But right, this leads to a very weird interaction in this kind of like compound. In the center of this compound, there's all the witches, but they meet with Sol meets with Anastasia. Sol and Torben meet with Anastasia, and the other witch is there too, right? I can't never remember the other mother's
Mother
name.
Curel. She's the one that actually birthed them, apparently. But go ahead.
Oh, okay. So there is definitely this meeting, right? Of they all kind of meet together. Maybe somebody else can explain the actual interaction better. Sure. So, but I don't like the way it is.
Sure. So Torben has set off on his quest to get off this planet by storming into the fortress compound, and Sol has decided to help him. So Sol
he's supposed to bring him back, but disobeys orders again.
Correct again, like when the
as he does
for the 3rd or 4th time in this episode, Sol decides to take matters into his own hands. So he helps Torben sneak into the fortress where Mother Anastasia and Mother Curel confront them, right? Because the Jedi have sliced their way into the facility and are invading. And so they come to this standoff where Mother Curel and Mother Anastasia are very suspicious of them. And Curel is very insistent that she won't let her children be taken away. And then May runs onto the scene. So simultaneously while all this is happening, right? Like May has already started a fire and is trying to kill Osha upstairs. Just like, I don't know.
which at this point we, the audience, believes is the reason everyone is dead,
right?
Because of episode 3,
right. It's always been May started a fire and the fire killed everyone, and that is not true. May did start a fire in a stone castle, and that causes a problem. But anyway, May comes onto the scene. Sol mistakes May for Osha, and then things get a little tense. I forget exactly when Torben ignites his lightsaber, but Mother Curel lunges at Sol, and Sol goes for his lightsaber to defend himself. And the great controversy is Mother Anastasia turns into a force vapor or something. We get this great scene of her using her force powers where she like goes metaphysical in an effort to stop Sol and Curel from fighting each other, and Sol's reaction to that is to stab her immediately in the belly. And so May witnesses Sol kill her mother, and then shit lets loose, and all of the witches start firing arrows at Torben, which begins Torben's only cool moment in the entire series, when the Jedi go and fight the Force witches. Which Adam, how did that end for them?
Well, so they do their little all our eyes turn black, so we're going to possess the big Wookiee thing. And so we get this sweet duel between a possessed Kalnaka and Sol and Torben. And it's, man, we were talking about it, like, it's really awesome. There's a lot of...
It's a cool duel, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool sequences as far as more non-saber combat again. Like, he's a big Wookiee, so at times he just grabs Sol by the throat and throws him aside and other things like that. I thought it was super cool. The way that it ends is Indara shows up as they're getting fucking annihilated, and she tackles him and she puts her hands on his head, and because she knows he's possessed by something, and she does some force thing to get him out of this, but it backfires and just manages to, we assume, kill every single Force witch who was participating in this,
which is just completely insane, but whatever, I guess.
No. It's left ambiguous as to like if that was a known side effect or what, but in order to break the curse put over Kelnaka, Indara has to use her amazing Jedi Master Force powers, and that kills all of the witches, every single one of them, Mother Curel included. And that is the scene that Osha eventually arrives on, having crawled out of her burning bedroom and is finding herself sort of in the center of the fortress. And then this is the reveal that as May and Osha are across the chasm staring at each other, it's actually Sol holding up the bridges, right? And because he's merely a young Jedi Knight, he can't hold both of them up. He has to make a choice. And he chooses to grab and save Osha, letting May fall to her death. And so that is May's angry origin story. She saw Sol kill her mom. The rest of the Witch Coven died, and then they stole Osha away and decided to tell her about none of this, letting her believe that her sister had killed her whole family and then promptly died afterwards, and attempting to raise her as a Jedi. And that's kind of... Is that the end of the Jedi Witch story, Adam? Did we cover everything?
I believe so. It might be worth mentioning that in episode 3, we do see them all like incapacitated at the end, and we notice they're not burned alive or cut up with sabers. So you are kind of left wondering exactly what happened. But yeah, I mean, I think we all just assume they burned to death until it finds out that, like, you know, May accidentally sets the place on fire, which is fine.
Whatever.
I mean, a kid doing kid stuff, like, it makes sense. But it's weird to me that in that final scene with Sol, you know, holding them up on the bridges, neither one of May never says, like, I didn't mean to, like,
right.
I didn't mean to burn it all down.
Well, it is, right, I understand Sol's a young Jedi Knight and whatnot, but, like, could he really not have saved both of them? Like,
listen, I will say this. I think Jeff has convinced me. I think Jeff has convinced me that he could not. And Jeff, why don't you just go over the facts again?
Right. So, you know, Sol is a younger Jedi Knight, right? Like, we just watched Indara, like, sort of one-shot the Wookiee mind control stuff, so she's clearly much more powerful. And the thing with Sol, and the thing with depictions of the Force, right, is that it takes concentration. It does take effort, right? And so when you're doing stuff as, like, a sudden reaction, like, Sol just sees the girls on this bridge, it's about to collapse. So he reflexively tries to grab both of them. And then apparently once you're committed to a force power, it's really hard to like dial it up and down or whatever. So his only option for stopping the whole thing from collapsing was to use all of his focus on one of them, and that he just wasn't fast enough to switch back to the other one. I find it pretty believable when you look at it being a reflex and a reaction, and the fact that he is a young Jedi who just got his ass beat by a Wookiee. So,
I guess that's fair, right? I mean, I've used a similar argument for why Kylo Ren can be fought with at the end of Force Awakens with like Poe or with Finn and Rey, right? Like he just got shot by a Wookiee bowcaster to the chest, like, or to the stomach, I guess. Like, he's in pain, he's weakened. Like, I guess I can buy that. The soul is younger, less experienced, tired, whatever. I think my biggest problem with this episode, though, and just everything here, is I think this mystery takes too long to be revealed for the ultimate, like, conclusion to just be too murky. Like, Soul clearly acts in a method of self-defense. Like, he believes Anastasia is going to do something violent in this moment that has now escalated to violence. Like, he acts in what feels like pretty clear self-defense. And sure, like, them, jumping into the compound in the first place is an act of aggression, but what May sees could be interpreted as self-defense. Like, it's just such a murky situation that I feel like it doesn't hit hard enough for me to buy that the whole crux of this entire story is being based on this event. It's just too murky for me, I think.
I think that's what makes it good, though, is that they have... So it's always hard to do, right? Like, you want to portray a story that is relatable on both sides, right? Like, you're very prone to be empathetic with the witches who just want the future of their coven and their children to be safe. And of course, we've all been conditioned to see the Jedi as the wise protectors of peace and justice in the galaxy. So we have to do something to kind of incriminate them here. And I think they do a really good job of that. Like, this entire situation is Soul's own doing through his rash and foolish actions. And then, we talk about it being self-defense because the Force Witch started coming at them. And I think that would be a fine justification for like a regular person. But the Jedi have a monopoly on Force use throughout the galaxy because they're better than the rest of us, right? And Soul is a Jedi Knight. He's supposed to be better than everyone else. So he should be wise enough to not have gotten himself into this situation and to not accidentally kill a child's mother in front of them. And so that's why...
Sure, and I can buy that, and I think I would have been more accepting of it if it didn't take 7 episodes to come out.
Yeah, I do agree with you that, like, it took too long to get there. Not that there's a ton of content in the show, right? It's only 8 episodes. It's just so much of the writing in, like, episode 1, 2, and 6, and, like, in different other spots was just not interesting that... we got impatient for the payoff, and then while I think the payoff was good, it took too long because the rest of the writing kind of fell down. Adam, what's your take on all of this?
There's just bits and pieces of it that don't work to me. Like, I would agree. I think, especially the more we've talked about it, Soul's depiction of his whole thing works pretty well. I still just... Of all of the people involved, I feel like Torben had the least reason to take a vow of silence and kill himself.
Yeah, they really did him dirty. Like, what the...
So his entire character and what they do with him doesn't work for me at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, at that point, like I said, I did really enjoy the mind control thing and the duel. The fallout of Torben's story, though, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The part where May might not explain in the most appropriate time to Osha, like, I didn't try to burn this place down as it's burning down around us. There's a couple little things that I think are a little silly, but I do think overall it's an interesting retread through episode 3. You see those new angles. Some things start to make sense. Some of the dots start to connect. You, like you said, you do feel for kind of both sides of this because you sort of start to understand why they did what they did, even if it doesn't come around to being as awful as you thought it might have been.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I can definitely agree with that for the most part. I think I just think that it takes... I really think my big issue is that so much of the pacing is weird in the middle parts of it that, like, by the time we get there, it just doesn't feel satisfying enough to justify what has happened. And I think that might largely be just because the pacing of it is so weird to me. Like, so much dead space in episodes like 2, 6, even 4 has so much, like, dead space that I feel like could have been used to make the mystery more impactful, or just get to it sooner, or something, and it ends up falling a little flat compared to what I was expecting and hoping for, I think, for me.
Yeah, that's not an unreasonable take.
Yeah, and it's not even like I'm saying, there should have been way more action scenes in some of those in between episodes. Not every episode needs a lightsaber fight, right? But
no, definitely.
But even sometimes
not.
It's just like the way the plot progresses is it feels like we've spent an episode walking in a circle, and then we're kind of right back at a place that we were already familiar with at the beginning of this episode. Like I think that's the case,
right?
With what is it episode? The one right before the big Jedi duel. Like I feel like that was kind of the case.
Yeah, 4. A lot of the episodes feel like they just like meander through the episode. Yeah, it's like what are we doing with this episode? How are we driving the plot forward or like building the characters in interesting ways?
Yeah, and that's definitely the weakness of this particular series, right? And the thing is that we know it's not impossible because there are other Star Wars franchises that have done it. A slow build series with a large cast of characters called Andor is a magnificent piece of work. And meanwhile, you have the Acolyte kind of trying to do something vaguely similar, and it just doesn't hit the right story beats the way Andor does. It's just puts Andor in a league of its own, with Acolyte being a show you should watch, and then the rest of the Star Wars. I don't know. We won't get into that right here, but
I was about to say we do have one more episode left of the Acolyte to talk about that I do think does some cool things too. Like it's as much as episode 7 doesn't fully work for me, I do think the end pays off in a pretty decent way.
I love the ending. So, Austin, did you see... Well, when I say did you see the twist coming in this episode, do you know what I mean by the twist?
I don't know if I do know what you mean by the twist, so why don't you just give it to me, Jeff? What is the twist?
Sure. Adam, would you call this a twist? The fact that Osha ends up, like, giving into her dark nature and being the one to kill Sol. It's not the stranger. It's not May. Osha completes May's training and kills Sol, a Jedi, without a weapon. Did you see that coming, Adam?
Yeah, so I almost feel dumb for not seeing it coming.
I do too. I
feel like they actually do a pretty good job of laying out some hints, but maybe that's why it actually feels satisfying, is because there's a lot of shows who pull shit like this, and you're like, oh, come on, like who was going to figure that out? But this show actually kind of guides you there, and I'd much rather feel like, damn, I should have realized that, instead of who the fuck would realize that, so I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I definitely think I saw that moment coming, like, right before it happened. Like, I was like, oh, they're gonna do this thing where Osha kills Sol, won't they? And then they did it, and I was like, okay, like, that's awesome. Like, I thought that worked out really well. I thought that moment, that kind of full circle moment, and I know this is controversial among the internet, but I really love the like bleeding the Kyber crystal moment, watching the blade turn red. Super cool visual to me. I love that moment. I love her taking Sol and like you said, completing that training that May was doing.
Yeah, I also think the Kyber crystal moment is great. The pedantic nerd in me wants to be like, no, the crystals are a specific color. But you know what? You know what I like about this? His saber like gets damaged. They like break it. So it's not just like they're not establishing that like when a bad guy picks up a lightsaber it should turn red or whatever, right? It's establishing that like crystals themselves can be sensitive to someone like unleashing evil force powers if things aren't done correctly. So if you're a pedantic nerd who didn't like that, I say shut up. It's cool. It's awesome to see the blade transition from red to blue. Sorry, from blue to red.
After 8 episodes of them saying, you must kill a Jedi without a weapon, and then Osha has a vision where she says, May is going to stab Sol. It's like, how did I not figure this out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just actually more and more obvious the more I think about it. And it's pretty good. I think it worked well.
But and even before Osha does get the killing blow, we do get a really sick battle between Sol and Kamir.
Yes.
Darth Teeth, whatever we want to call him these days. Darth Jason. A really cool battle between those two. A lot of that, like, using the environment, using, not just lightsabers, like, doing interesting and neat things with the choreography. It's just every fight in this show is it's like such a joy to watch.
Yeah, I think they really nailed the balance of making the lightsaber look like a, like, fast weapon, right? Because it's a blade made of light, and so like these battles need to move quickly. But they do it in a more interesting way, a more impactful way. Like the fights seem to have more gravitas to me than they ever did in the prequels with their flashy Obi-Wan spinning and stuff, right? Like there's that scene in the bridge because they're battling in the ruins of the fortress, right? So Soul and Darth Jason fight in the bridge, and like their sabers are locked, and they're dragging it through like the environment and cutting stuff, and you really see Soul like come into his element as a Jedi Master and show off his awesome powers to once again defeat the stranger and put him at his mercy. It's just the problem for Soul is that he was also at Osha's mercy. And she embraced her inner Darth Vader and chokes him out on screen, and it's just wonderful to hear the sound of, I guess, I don't know, what would you call that, Force Crush? It's just really, really great sound work again as Soul delivers some emotional pleas to Osha just to die by her hand in a truly brutal scene.
I think part of why the choreography in this works a little better than the prequels, and maybe this is just my bias, I maybe need to go watch all these fights again to make sure, but I'm fairly certain something I've noticed in the prequels over and over is they attack each other's lightsabers. Like the choreography is striking at their saber instead of striking at them and having them block it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like they do a really good job of that in this show. And that's part of why the duel with Khmer works so well, is because he is slamming his head into their sabers. Like, he's not just holding up one saber to block four sabers, which is as stupid as it would sound. You know, they make it do something else that I think is just much more believable.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And you're right, Adam. Like you can go watch the behind the scenes of the prequels and see like the choreography coach and stuff. You know, you can see Ewan McGregor practice, and that is what they are doing, is that they are striking the sabers back and forth, and it's just, I don't know if it was a product of fight scenes at the time in Hollywood and we've just like progressed from that or what, but I would honestly call like, I don't know, this final fight between Soul and the Stranger might be like my favorite one-on-one duel in all of Star Wars now.
It is really good, no doubt. And yeah, I could see an argument made for the best one-on-one duel because it's got so many different moments, right? It's not just doing the same movements over and over again. And like, yeah, the Anakin Obi-Wan fight in episode 3 tries to do different things and like tries to use the environment, but it always just like slows down the fight or makes it like look weird and janky. Whereas this one, like every time they use the environment, it's like for Khmer to like throw Soul against the wall or something, and like it just feels more dynamic than most of the prequel stuff for sure.
And this might be a bit rambly, but like whatever you think a lightsaber should behave like, you can probably find some example of it in Star Wars media, right? Mm-hmm. But it's probably worth noting that George Lucas himself couldn't make up his damn mind, because there was there's an interview with either David Prowse or Alec Guinness, I can't remember, and he's basically saying, oh yeah, he said that because like there's so much energy rating off of these, even a Jedi needs to use two hands, right? So pretty much every depiction of a lightsaber in the OT, they're using two hands, even in that final duel between Luke and Vader, right? But then when it came to the prequels, he basically told him like it was a majorette baton and just spin around, do whatever you want. So I agree with you. I think it's really cool that they have finally found that middle ground where it's like they don't look like toys, but they also have a lot of speed and action to the fights. It's like they finally figured it out.
Yeah, and I absolutely love it. And just to keep harping on the duel, right? They do a lot of cool different aspects. Like Chimera brings out his double-bladed aspect again. They use lightsaber throw for what, I don't know, the second time I've seen it in live action. And Soul does this great shot where he like uses the Force to deflect these spinning lightsabers and things. It's just truly a really good sequence, and what I would be excited to see in a feature film. If we ever come back to that world of Star Wars, I don't quite know where that's going.
Even with the colossal failure from a critical and even public reception that Rise of Skywalker was, I think it still made a ton of money. So I'm sure they're coming back to it at some point.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't unprofitable, but.
Well, I feel like it was Solo that made them put a break to the movies more so than Rise of Skywalker.
But like, who asked for a Solo movie? You know,
I didn't ask for a sequel trilogy.
That is, I guess that's fair. There are other things that happen in this episode. None of them, I think, as cool as, Soul dying or the cool Soul Khmer fight. But
There's the reveal that Vernestra is actually Khmer's old master.
I was about to say, we do see Vanestra arrive on the planet and have that reveal moment, which is cool, and I think sets up some neat stuff for a potential season 2.
I do like, so I believe it's this episode where finally all the politicking comes together. You've got the senator breathing down Vanestra's neck about reviewing the Jedi, and, after this epic fight scene and Soul dying, Vanestra takes the opportunity to use Soul to cover it all up, right? Like, she literally finds his corpse, talks about him being her friend, and then goes and tells everyone that Soul fell to the dark side and murdered all of these Jedi, like permanently undoing any kind of legacy he had. And Osha is now firmly the acolyte of the stranger. So this is really, Soul's failure is complete.
And it does do a good job of the thing that I think a lot of people were wondering is like, okay, like there was a lot of talk about like, okay, Ki-Adi-Mudi's in this, and like there's Sith in this. How do they correlate that with him saying he hasn't seen a Sith in 1,000 years or whatever? Like how do those all piece together? And I think this moment works where it's like, okay, we see how that works by Vanestra just laying all the blame on Soul and hiding Darth Jason's existence entirely, which I think makes sense for this moment.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It demonstrates how, the Jedi aren't innocent in this downfall of the Republic that's coming soon. And they're willing to, undercut democracy by lying to the Senate when it's convenient for them. And that would be all well and good for like Vanestra's character and like maybe you're just seeing some cracks in it. But what really brought it all together for me was the implication, the final cameo of the show, where Vanestra walks into the Jedi Temple and addresses Master Yoda. You see just the back of his head. She walks in and she's like, "Master, we have something to discuss." And it's like, oh no way! It goes right to the top. Yoda knew the whole time.
I say, so is he complicit, or is he just a bigger idiot than he is in episode 3?
I was about to say, which one are they going to go with, though? Like, is she telling him the real story, or, like, I mean, you would assume that's what it is. You would assume she's going to, like, give him the real story, but...
Yeah, we don't know, and that's why I call it the implication, right? Like, if we ever find out what really happens, that might be less exciting than them simply... implicating Master Yoda in this great cover-up of the Dark Jedi have returned.
Right.
Dude, he spends the entirety of episode 3 rubbing his temples and just like, oh, it's so cloudy, you can't see anything. I mean, who knows?
There's also a Darth Plagueis cameo in this that I feel obligated to mention because I was wondering how they would do that if Plagueis was going to be around at all. He is in a cave for some reason.
He's on he's clearly the stranger's master, right? And he's just grandpa in the basement, right? So that's why they don't
Well, we don't know that because they don't tell us anything.
Right.
But I'm going to assume they'll address that in season 2 if it happens.
I do think Headland has said outside of the show that is Khmer's master.
Okay.
That they are trying to say for sure that Plagueis is Khmer's master.
I believe I read that in researching this, yeah.
So then we would assume, right? I didn't know that that was stated. That is interesting because we'd assume that then Khmer has to die at some point, and Plagueis takes on Palpatine as new apprentice, unless they're going to try and make a Khmer as Plagueis thing, Khmer as Palpatine thing. But I hope not.
No,
I cannot imagine.
Right. Khmer's not Palpatine. Is he his dad though? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Who's to say? Maybe Osha and
I
don't know how that would work.
Just,
but
the ultimate plot of Star Wars is just who's your daddy. All right, like that's the whole
yeah,
thing.
it really is.
Sorry, I say Sidious does kill Plagueis, right? Like he talks about that to Anakin.
Yes. Well, that's the story that he tells.
Says,
I think we're supposed to.
He says his apprentice kills him. So who knows?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's implied, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess they could go either direction then. They could either make Khmer kill him somehow, and that power finds itself to Palpatine, or maybe Khmer fails to kill Plagueis in an attempt, and only Palpatine succeeds at doing so.
Who's to say? Do you think? Okay, let's maybe take this to the future a little bit. Unless we have anything else that we want to say about current Acolyte.
No, I think the show's pretty well wrapped up. Final thoughts on it?
My final thought is just like, whoever told you this was like the worst Star Wars ever, just tell them to fuck off and just go watch it. I mean, it's only 8 episodes. Like
It's a show that has a lot of interesting ideas that personally I don't think it executes all of them well, but it's better to have interesting ideas than to just have nothing interesting and execute it well.
Yeah.
Like
they tried. They tried harder than some of these damn Disney Plus shows have tried.
exactly. And I think that in and of itself is worth at least going and check it out. If even honestly, if nothing else, to see the like dope action in like three or four of the 8 episodes, like there's enough cool action sequences in there to make it worth your time.
Yeah, at the very least, go Google 3-hole punch Jackie and just watch that scene.
Yeah, like this is the best Star Wars choreography we've gotten in a long time.
Listen, like sometimes I'll sit down and watch all of the Old Republic cinematics back to back. I'm just gonna tack on the Episode 5 duel to my watching.
Oh my god! Yeah, that's a great idea, Adam. I might do that right now.
Do we think we're going to get a second season of this?
Yeah, I think it might even have been confirmed. I'm not sure, but I would be shocked if they canceled the show.
I haven't seen any confirmation of a second season. I know, Adam, you said you were doing some research before. Did you see anything?
I don't think it's been confirmed. I think that I think enough people still watched it, if for no other reason than to make shitty video essays where in all 8 of you say you're done and not watching the next episode. But I think Disney's going to hold their ground and do a second season. I mean, they leave it on a bit of a cliffhanger. Not only do they leave it on a cliffhanger with the story we were told, but then they bring in Darth Plagueis, right? So it's very clear they want to do something. They've teased it. I think it would backfire for them more. Maybe they cut the budget. Like apparently this show was really expensive to make. Maybe they backtrack on that a little bit. But I can't imagine them just outright dropping it. I mean, Andor was really well received, but no one watched it, and that's getting a season 2. So I think we'll still get a season 2 of this.
I just feel like I keep getting conflicted reports when I look up stuff, because sometimes I'll see like The Acolyte was the most watched show for 4 months in a row, da-da-da. And then I'll see another article that's like, nobody watched The Acolyte. And it's like, I don't know what to believe anymore.
Well, that's what sucks about the era of streaming is unlike the old Nielsen ratings. We don't know. We don't fucking know how many people watched this, and we never will. We will have to take Disney's marketing propaganda at face value, and that's really the only information we have about the viewership of this.
Yeah, and they won't. It sounds like they're not going to give us those specific numbers. But I guess if we get a season 2, we can assume that it was well viewed enough. I know, like my parents watched it, and I think they enjoyed it. I'd be curious, like what the average Star Wars fan, somebody who's not terminally online, thought of The Acolyte.
Well, before we sign off here, Austin, is there any more speculation you want to do about where this is going? Because I know you, Jeff and I aren't quite as familiar, but you're a little more familiar about the Tenebris and the Darth Plagueis and all of that line of Sith wizardry.
Yeah, so all I really know is that even according to Disney canon, as confirmed through a couple different books, like Darth Tenebris, however you pronounce that man's name, is Plagueis' master, and Plagueis we know is Palpatine's master at some point, and we at least assume that Palpatine has killed Plagueis. Like I'm curious if you think, are they gonna bring in Palpatine to season 2 or a potential season 3 or wherever they get? Like, are we going to see Acolyte kind of go all the way into the start of Darth Sidious and like his manipulations? Like, I'm curious how deep you think they're going to go with the Acolyte, or if they're gonna try and keep it pretty separated.
So the most that I think, enjoy watching is if they kind of explain Anakin's immaculate conception a little bit. Like, I would be on board because May and Osha are a result of manipulating a strong force convergence or whatever, right? So I would be on board with them like implying some of the Sith involved in season 2 like have a hand in eventually bringing about Anakin's birth. I would be okay with that. If that's like the core plot of season 2, I find that kind of gross. I don't need Palpatine to be in season 2. I'm very excited about there being more of a standalone story. What are your thoughts, Adam?
I'm probably on board with that too. It's one of those things where I think it could be interesting to see, like, is the prophecy just a giant Sith plot, right? It was all of this because this is what the Sith do. They sit in the corner and they come up with plans for centuries, right? There is an interesting way to do that, I would agree that I don't want to directly connect some of these characters. And I don't even know. I mean, there's so many humans involved. None of them are going to be alive in 100 years. So I don't know exactly how you would connect it directly. But maybe you set up enough of a path where you know that this person is eventually going to meet the person who trains Palpatine or whatever else, right?
Right. I mean, we know that at least at some point Plagueis has to become Palpatine's master. Because I guess I think we know that for a fact. I think that's a fact. It gets a little blurry, but I think it is factual that Plagueis at least at some point trains Palpatine. Now, whether or not Palpatine kills him, I think is a little blurry. I think that's left up for interpretation. So could it be a situation where like Kamir is in his old age and he's trying to train Palpatine and like to overthrow, kind of like the Darth Bane Xana thing from back in the Darth Bane books, where like Xana takes on an apprentice to overthrow Bane, and we see the same thing with like Kamir starts to train Palpatine. Who knows? I don't think we're gonna see any of that necessarily. I think Jeff is right. I think the thing we're gonna see the most potentially is some sort of force manipulation to talk about Anakin coming from the Sith in some way. I think that's been hinted at in Star Wars like lore and fandom for years. I think there's like little drops of that with people being like, Anakin's a product of Palpatine. And I think we're going to see Disney confirm that in some way, shape, or form. Or Palpatine or Plagueis. Like, it's like almost directly stated in the Plagueis novel. So I think they're going to take some inspiration from that Plagueis novel and tie Anakin's birth to Plagueis in some way in Acolyte Season 2, or potentially a Season 3, or however long they want to run the show. But I don't think it'll be the core plot, and I really hope it's not, because I'm with you. I want to see a show that stands alone, a show that kind of does its own thing, because I think that's what makes Acolyte interesting, is the stuff that stands alone apart from the Skywalker saga.
Would that make Palpatine Luke's grandfather and Rey's grandfather?
I guess. At this point, family trees in Star Wars. Who
can we
cares?
Decanonize Rise of Skywalker? Can we just do it on our own?
It would
Change.org petition.
Do we have that authority? I'm sure that Change.org petition happened at some point.
I think my only sure things about Season 2 is there's just going to be some type of confrontation between Kamir and Vanestra, and some type of confrontation between May and Osha again, but I couldn't even speculate what that looks like.
I hope, if nothing else, we keep the same stunt team and like choreography team.
Please, God.
Like as long as that stays intact, as long as the whoever worked on all the fight choreography, as long as they stay employed, I'm down.
Yeah. Adam was talking about budget cuts, and it's like they can't spend $1 less on those lightsaber fights. All right, like
no, if they want to spend right, I don't know where else they're gonna cut the budget. Right,
just make a 5-episode season.
Yeah, maybe. Right, none of these actors are like. I can't imagine costing a ton of money. Soul's dead, so if he was costing a lot of money, he's not gonna be costing any. Like. The budget for the temple feels like it's like shoestrings. So. Yeah,
I don't. It is definitely high production quality. I just feel like they've made the wrong choices with some of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see though. I am excited for a Season 2. I want to see it. I will be there. It is not the worst show that Star Wars has ever put out, guys. Boba Fett is. Like...
It's not the worst media. It's not even the worst show. It's not even the worst Disney Plus show. It's just it's nowhere near the bottom of the totem pole, right?
Yeah. It's totally worth watching. It is good entertainment. It's just not something to base your entire YouTube career on.
Yes, it's like you sometimes tell people not to believe the hype. This time it's like, don't believe the hate. It's just not quite that bad.
Yeah, like it is fine. It is even at moments good.
Well, that about wraps up this episode on Disney's latest live-action Star Wars, The Acolyte.
As always, you can listen to all of our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcasting platform.
And you can follow us on all the social medias at the Games Gone By podcast.
Signing off for Games Gone By, I'm Adam.
I'm Austin.
And I'm Jeff.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
No, 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 no.